When I was a kid, probably in junior high, I went to my pastor and I said, okay, what are these Nephilim? What is this? I don't understand. And he, being a very learned, wise man, he said, well, don't know. But he said, what if the myths that we hear, about Hercules or whatever, might actually have some bearing of truth? And I was like, that's really fascinating. And that did not help me answer my question at all. But I have recently listened to an episode on the Lord of Spirits podcast called A Land of Giants, and it was super fascinating. And so what I'm going to do is try to summarize some of the most interesting points from this talk, just in case you don't feel like listening to a 3.5 hour presentation. However, my goal is that after listening to this, you'll be so interested that you will then go listen to a 3.5 hour presentation because it's really, really fascinating. Okay, so basically, just to set the groundwork here, we are talking about this interesting passage in Genesis. Here we are, Genesis 6. When men began to multiply on the surface of the ground, and daughters were born to them, God's sons saw that men's daughters were beautiful, and they took any that they wanted for themselves as wives. Yahweh said, "My spirit will not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh, so his days will be 120 years." The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also after that, when God's sons came in to men's daughters and had children with them. These were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. And yes, as a modern person, this passage is really weird. And the point that these Orthodox Christian guys are going to talk about over the course of their presentation is that this is only weird for us because we're so far removed from this period of history and the views that people had back then. Okay, so for example, today we separate history into BC and AD, before Christ, and Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. And if you're more of a modern person, then you go for Common Era and before Common Era. And I just have so much beef with that because what makes it common? Okay, whatever. We're moving on. In the ancient times, they also had an AD. That was the Antediluvian time, or the pre-flood time. This was the era before the flood, and then of course after that you've got after the flood, right? So you've got the Antediluvian period, which is this era, and then the world gets destroyed. And this is in a ton of myths across a ton of cultures. Like, this is just, it's out there. And so the idea is that everybody knows that there has been this destructive thing that has happened in the world. And this is the demarcation of history. Like, history changed with the flood. And then you have a whole bunch of accounts talking about what is this thing, what does it mean, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is significantly older than the flood account in the Bible. Okay, so this is important for thinking about what is the Bible, what's its purpose, how does it work, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so you've got this period of time where you had it beforehand and then after this flood. And what the passage that we just read in Genesis 6 is setting up for the flood account. So what's happening with that? Okay, so we've got these men of old. Oops, to men of old. Okay, and so basically what we have, oh, that's wrong. Wow, I have this out of order. I'm sorry. I had some images here that I was going to do. Okay, basically, if you go back to any ancient culture and you say, what does a supernatural being look like? What does a supernaturally empowered God thing look like? And they'll say that it's about 12 feet tall. Okay, it's about a 12 feet tall thing. Okay, so where do we get these 12 feet tall, supernaturally occurring type things? What is this? Okay, well, the way that this works, all right, is that you have some kind of supernatural being then going and having intercourse with a woman. And the result of that is one of these Nephilim. Now, if you look at the text, okay, the word Nephilim here, the Nephilim here, it means giants. Okay, that's literally what this word means. And according to the guys on this podcast, okay, these sons of God have to be some kind of supernatural being, some kind of angelic type thing. Okay, so it's something like that. All right. But then of course the question is, well, angels can't procreate with women, or can they? Okay, and so there's this discussion about this. But according to these guys, again, the general understood thing in the ancient world was that what you would do is you would have a human be kind of your mediator for this. Okay. And so we have this thing, it's called Og's Bed. You can go look it up. It's an actual relic thing that we found. And it's for a 12-foot tall person, which is kind of interesting. Okay. But the way that this works, okay. Wrong thing. Okay. The way that this works is what you would do is you would take the king, who would have some kind of divine divinity to himself, at least he'd claim so, right? And then you would take a woman, typically a temple prostitute or something along that, maybe a priestess, high priestess or something like that. And then you would have this supernatural being come and be part of this thing, right? It would be a melding of the man and this supernatural being here, which would then get the offspring to be 2/3 human and 1/3 divine. Okay, so you got kind of this demigod status, and that is that is what we get when we get these 12-foot tall people. Okay, now they are clear to say that this doesn't have to mean that you're giants. In fact, he has this really fun quote where he says that it's not that people used the word giant to say that someone was tall, but rather that they used the word giant, they said someone was tall, to show that this person is one of these tyranny type people. They're these big, powerful, do what they want kind of person. Okay? Now, this is setting up a lot of really interesting stuff for us as we go through scripture, okay? But basically, what we have here is, despite attempts to translate it differently, it seems that, according to these guys at least, okay, that the giants are the result of a supernatural and human pairing through this pagan ritual of coupling a person to a supernatural deity or being and then bringing that together with a woman. Okay. Now, they also say that this is cross-cultural. Like, this is all over the place. You can go in history and look in a lot of different places. And not only do you find stories of giants, but you also find these stories and these practices of this nature, this pagan practice of getting a supernatural being and human and doing this connection thing through that to get this extra special, extra powerful outcome from it, right? The offspring is this extra special thing that you get from it. All right. Now, the Bible takes all of this, especially with the flood accounts, and says, this is actually bad. And they talk about the special knowledge, the secret knowledge that they get and all this stuff. This is also, you can find this in Bema as well if you listen to that podcast. This idea is much more fleshed out there as well. But basically the idea is that you've got this second encounter, and Dr. Michael Heiser would say that everybody in the ancient world knew that there were kind of like three major falls. Like we know about the first fall, right? With Adam and Eve in the garden, right? But then you have Genesis 6, where you have supernatural beings coming in and messing things up and causing problems. And then the third one, of course, is Babel. Okay, so you've got these multiple iterations of problems for humanity. Okay. Which then leads to giant maki, however you say that, where basically it's now war against the giants. Okay, and this leads to a lot of what the Old Testament is about. Okay, the Old Testament has a lot of stuff, and it's not until Daniel or David where we finally actually start taking care of them for realsies. Okay, so there are other fascinating things in this episode about different groups that have taken out different groups of these giants and that kind of stuff. Okay, but when they go into the land, okay, so here we are in Deuteronomy chapter 20, and we're setting up the rules of engagement for going into the promised land. Okay, so when you draw near to a city to fight against it, then proclaim peace to it. Okay, they say this is, of course, totally absurd. No one else in the ancient world does this. Everyone else in the ancient world says the good thing to do is to take as many take as much land, do as much conquest as you possibly can, destroy as much, take as much as you can, because this world, it's all we got. We got to make ourselves as big as possible. Let's go. All right. But here God says, no, when you go into the land, you don't do that. You make peace with everybody. But if it gives an answer of peace, then great. Okay. Then they're going to become laborers for you. Okay. Cool. That's better than murdering, right? Okay. Okay. If they will not make peace with you, but will make war against you, then you shall besiege it. And when Yahweh your God delivers it into your hand, then you shall strike every male. with the edge of your sword, but the women and little ones and the livestock and all that's in the city, even all of its plunder, you shall take for plunder for yourself. Okay, because this is what we're going to do. Like this is great. Okay, but of the cities of the peoples that Yahweh your God gives you as your inheritance, you shall save alive nothing that breathes, but you shall utterly destroy them: the Hittite, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, as Yahweh your God has commanded you. They are not, that they not teach you to follow all their abominations, which they have done for their gods. So would you sin against Yahweh your God. When you shall besiege a city a long time, then you shall make war against it. And you're going to do, okay, and so you're going to destroy everything that comes from this, which they say points out that when God sends his people to make war against these tribes, and people say, oh, genocide and all that kind of stuff. It's like, no. This is about eradicating pagan practices that are abominable. And in this case, it's cannibalism. Maybe it's merely drinking human blood, but it's also consuming human flesh. Okay. In addition to these special practices by which you are trying to get demonic infused power into your people. And so this is the war against that level of paganism. And in that case, it's not even about conquest here. This is because they don't get to keep anything. You have to totally, completely destroy it. And ultimately, when you get to Saul, he doesn't completely destroy it. And that's why God sends Samuel and it's like, what are you doing, man? We're here to destroy this stuff. We're not here to make money or even to try and come up with good sacrifices for God or any of the other reasons that you're going to do. Instead, we are here to eliminate this horrific practice, which again, they say this isn't about genes or a particular tribe or anything like that. Instead, it's about pagan practices and how that makes you part of this group. And they have this great discussion about Israelites and how that kind of shows that even in the Bible. Okay, so it's not about ethnic groups or genetic lines or anything like that. It is instead about practices and the ways that people do things. In this case, abominable, horrific, terrible things for them. And then they go off on some interesting discussions that, since they're Orthodox, they have some interesting ideas. And I think that's kind of fun. It was kind of great to just listen to that. Okay, but now let's jump forward in history. Okay, so this is after they've gotten into the land and they still have not done the whole job. Okay, in fact, we're here in 1 Samuel. What are we? 17. Okay. All right. They say a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, this is verse 4, named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span, went out. Okay. So they've drawn up battle lines. They're there. And then they pull out their secret weapon, Goliath of Gath. He is not a Philistine. He's of Gath. He is one of these people who has this demonically empowered thing that then we use the language of giant for him, okay? And beyond that, right, he had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he wore a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. He had bronze shin armor on his legs and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. The staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. His shield bearer went before him. Okay. And he cries out and he says, why have you come out? So, and notice that he says that he is a Philistine. Okay. But he's not actually a Philistine genetically. He's of Gath, but he has come in and joined this thing. Okay. He's joined in and he's part of this thing. Okay. So what we have here though, is this interesting thing about his armor. It's a lot of bronze, and I guess I should have done the spearhead iron. Sorry. Okay, but he's wearing a bunch of bronze, and as a kid, that went right over my head. Who cares, right? It's kind of cool, I guess. It's kind of interesting. You get the pictures, right, where it's kind of gold like this. My amazing drawing. Okay, like maybe this is cool, but like the point is that we are out of the Bronze Age. In fact, his spear tip is iron. Okay, so we've entered the Iron Age now historically, but he's wearing ancient bronze stuff. Because he's one of he's one of these old guys, or at least he's part of the old group. He's part of these Nephilim. He's part of this demonically empowered group of people who are the scary ancient fighter guys. And he's using their ancient tech, their ancient gear for it. Which, I already knew that, this whole giant thing was about these evil groups that, these groups that are doing these evil things and all that stuff. Okay, so like, I already knew about this. So it was interesting then to learn that no, it's actually this bronze stuff is actually telegraphing that to us, in addition to his size and all that stuff. Which, by the way, the size of him, numbers, very confusing in ancient stuff. We don't really know exactly, and so that's why it could be that he was only 6'6", or maybe he was 9 feet. And the idea is either way, he's big. Okay, and again, it doesn't require that he be large. He could be large, and there's lots of interesting discussion surrounding. Okay, were they actually giants, or is it just that this is, again, a word that we use to describe these tyrannical type people? Okay, so this is all really fascinating stuff for me. And then they go forward in time, and they talk about how Jesus then is casting out spirits and all of this stuff, because he is also further bringing the kingdom and showing that these evil forces don't have any power over that. And then Heiser and others have talked about how this is Jesus moving in and setting up the kingdom and getting back the lost tribes and ultimately bringing all nations back to him and all that kind of stuff. So I think that this was a very fascinating episode. I highly recommend it to you as something to learn more about if you haven't learned about Nephilim before, or you're interested in learning more about it, especially from a different perspective, potentially, than what you've heard before. So go check that out, linked in the description. And after you've listened to it, what was the most interesting thing for you? What really stood out to you? Come back and talk to me about that, because I'm very interested. Okay, real quick, I'm just going to click over here and double check that I don't have any things that I wanted to talk about. Oh yeah, that was another interesting thing that they talked about. Okay, I'm glad I checked my notes. So they said that it's weird because modern people, we don't know about this, and it's really weird to hear about this whole practice, right? Like what in the world is going on with these people, right? Yeah, okay, there we go. There's my awesome drawing here. All right, what's going on with this, and why don't we know about it? Well, because they say Christianity eradicated paganism. Paganism was gone by the 2nd century, and so while there are movements to eradicate these groups of people throughout the Bible, lots of wars against that, and ultimately kind of getting rid of a lot, there's still this pagan influence in lots of different cultures, including Japanese cultures. They talk about how even up to World War II, this practice was still being done in Japan by the emperor there. And it continues to this day, but they said they've toned back the sex part a lot. So I don't know what that means exactly, but okay, cool. So again, there's still this idea of trying to get this extra special thing. They also talk about how this method was about getting extra special knowledge from the supernatural. And they talk about Prometheus as an example of a story where here is a divine being bringing this special knowledge to humanity, and then humans are super happy about it, and the gods are super unhappy about it, and then he ends up getting his liver pecked out for all of eternity and all that stuff. And the point is that to the gods, getting this special secret knowledge is actually not good, but for humans, we like it. And they point out that the Bible shows that all this secret knowledge, this extra special stuff that people are trying to get through this supernatural mechanism, is actually destructive to humanity and leads to further brokenness and destruction, which then we see in paganism, destroying things. But paganism gets wiped out by Christianity, so that by a few centuries into the AD, we're now beyond it, and we don't see it anymore. We don't see this happening, this coupling, this attempt to get that stuff. And that's why a lot of Christians are like, I don't know what to do with this particular passage here in Genesis. This is weird. What is this? But they say, just like the flood, right? This antediluvian period, the breaking of the world, just like that, everybody knew about this back when this was originally penned. They already knew this stuff when these stories were generated and written down and recorded and passed down. And so this is new to us because we're so far removed, because we live in a Christian era, right? We have moved into the kingdom of God is here now because Jesus brought it. And therefore it is different. And they have a lot more to say about God's purpose, what Jesus is here for, salvation, all that stuff. You should totally go listen to it. Hopefully I've whetted your appetite enough. And then please come back after listening and let me know what was the part that was most fascinating to you. And yeah, I hope this was interesting. Go check it out.